That's not true.
Mayor Bain,
I'm here.
Vice Mayor Mitchell,
Here.
Councilman Best,
Present.
Councilman Zapata,
Present.
Councilman Petralanda.
Here.
We have our invocation by Vice Mayor Mitchell.
Yes. Wow.
Lord, we thank you at this time of Thanksgiving. We thank you for our many blessings to be citizens of this wonderful community, and we ask for your guidance tonight that the decisions we make are the best for our citizens and for our community. Amen.
Amen. We're going to have to say the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we're here tonight with the, we duly,
We are.
we did do the right thing as far as making sure everybody knew about this meeting and everything's cool about that. All right, we're here to talk about discussion of a comprehensive tree plan and ordinances. We have the board here from the Park and Parkways, and I went and spoke to them about some of the things I thought of. I know, and we're here to see if we can come up with something that will not hurt the canopy of the city, but also have a program to maybe have a little more control over what we're doing here when we have emergency situations. Do you have anything that you want to start with, or how do you?
No, I think in your packet you have the board minutes from their meetings, as well as a nice list called tree policy adjustments with different recommendations. So just discussing these one by one. I mean, the main issue we face in the city, or the main questions that we need to address, is going forward, what type of trees are we going to allow to be planted on city soils? As far as residential areas, are we going to place limits as to how far from power lines they can be planted, and things of that nature? So Tom Nash is here in case you have any technical questions on trees. They do have a recommendation from the board that we put out information to the residents on tree, and once we establish a policy, we change any changes that are made, we can work on that on the next Springs Connection, I guess, that we put out. We can do a whole thing on the tree ordinance and how to plant trees, what to plant, and all that. So we'll work on that.
You want to come up and give us a PowerPoint of what the five of you came up with as far as presenting tonight?
Yes.
Because not everybody has this. You will put it so everybody can hear.
Eric Ritchie, 224 Rednet Drive. Is this working right?
We hear you fine. Everybody hears you.
Okay, so to put it in perspective, I think that we're here because we want to know how to avoid the damages that we've experienced from the last number of hurricanes. Starting from Andrew, the damage of which has never been corrected. No city in Dade County or South Florida has replenished the loss from Andrew. Try as they might, work as they might. And I'm not sure, I'm sure Tom knows the number of trees that were lost for Irma. But what we want to do, I think we have a two-forked prong here. I think we want to do long-term, short-term. Long-term, according to, I think, what the consensus of the board was at our last meeting, is long range. The long range is education. The residents need to understand that power lines are going to be hit by limbs and trees if the limbs and trees are close to the power lines, close enough to hit them. I'm quoting off my top of my head now, but I think that the power line damage from Irma was 90% residential trees, if not more. So the real problem isn't city trees. The problem is residential trees, and the problem of residential trees is on the alleyways. When FP&L used to come through and cut back, we had a meeting years and years ago. Irene Priest might remember the date or the year, but we had a big conference with them about what we could do and what they could do, and how do we protect our trees on the alley. Well, at that time they gave us I think it was a 20-foot corridor, that is to say a radius of 10 feet from the power lines, unless it was 20 feet, I don't remember now, around the power lines back. You should not have any vegetation closer than 20 feet from a power line. So we made an agreement with them on that. But we agreed with them to do the pruning in a way that saved the tree if possible. FP&L uses National Arborist Association trimming policy, which is to cut at the collar of a limb or a co-nodal cut at a branch so that you don't damage the limb, which would damage eventually the tree. So we were very conscientious back then. So residents, I don't think, know what the policies are, and they need to be informed about that. So about 25 years ago, the city decided it wanted to go Tree City USA. And Tree City USA is an organization whose purpose is to protect and expand the vegetation and canopy of a city. The city of Miami Springs, if you go up in an airplane or Google it, or Google Earth, you can see our triangle of vegetation, green vegetation. And that's our canopy, of which we are very proud. It's not as dense perhaps as Coral Gables and Coconut Grove, and I don't know about Miami Shores, Tom might. But that's what we're about, to protect it. And we wrote a tree ordinance that protects trees so that we can protect the canopy, so that we qualified for Tree City USA. Most people in Miami Springs are proud of our canopy, and most people want to protect our canopy. But we also have to be practical enough to understand that we have power lines, and we have hurricanes, and we have trees. And those three things, when combined, cause problems. We were fairly lucky this time, but who knows what will happen next. So, what do we want to do? Short term, we want to figure out a way to decide what we want to plant on the city's properties, and I think we know pretty much how to do that, and I think the Public Works Department has done that for years. I think they've done the right thing. We made some big mistakes along the way. We planted black olives, as did Miami Lakes, and we're paying for it now. We're paying for the trees that we planted erroneously, and now they're a problem tree, and so on and so forth. So the tree ordinance protects trees. It protects trees on private property as well as public property. And the trees it protects on private property are specimen and protected trees. And any tree of a certain caliper has to be permitted to remove. Doesn't mean you need to mitigate, which is to say pay for the replacement of like-sized canopy if the tree is a nuisance tree or an undesirable tree like the black olive. But you have to have a permit, because if you don't get a permit, you may not finish the removal of the tree. You might just cut the branches off, stub it up, and leave it there, and it's an eyesore and it's not good. Trees, remember, protect your property. Trees protect your house. Trees are good. So, what we want to do is try to decide what trees the city will plant. Minor problem. I think Public Works knows exactly what to do there. If, as William just said, Mr. Lonzer just said, my question to Mr. Espino is the alleyway a right-of-way? And if so, can the city have ordinances on planting of trees or removal of trees within whatever safe distance there is. I put down 25 in my notes, but I don't know if it's 25. It may be 20, it may be 15. But you should have a setback. Mrs. Mayor, by the way, I want to give Mayor Bain credit for this. He's the one that first came up with a possible setback.
William Alonso gave me that idea. I will not take credit for, but William Alonso and I expressed.
Well,
this idea.
he's trying to help you, Billy.
Okay, it's okay.
Just trying to throw you some.
But I
throw you
throw.
some
I go ahead.
But you agree with that?
Yes, I do. I think that's
but,
one.
But I think this is a question for Dan Espino: is if it is a right-of-way, can you have a regulation? That's just a question for
I think
me.
Heidi can answer that.
Eric,
for us.
Eric, why don't you ask Katie?
Oh,
She'll
I'm sorry.
respond to that.
Katie, I'm sorry, I haven't.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought Danny
Oh, you
was the
can-
city attorney.
I'm one of them.
Oh, we have more. We're better protected.
Yes, we are.
What do you think?
I think that there is some regulation that can be done in the right-of-ways, including alleys. There is something that.
The microphone.
Sorry about that. There is some regulation that can be done. There's a bill going through the Senate right now in Florida, which may kind of make all of this moot. I don't know that it will pass, but there is a bill that's, it's Senate Bill 574 that's been presented by Senator Stube, and that prevents local governments from regulating trimming, removal, and harvesting of trees on private property. So what we would be able to do as far as alleys and rights of ways, that may be, you know, we may still have the ability to regulate that. So it all depends on what the legislator does this session, and then we'll take it from there.
But right now, if we wanted to try to implement the setback right now, until we can do that until we hear from what has to be said there.
I believe that may be so.
I think so.
Katie,
And
Katie is
but
not.
Mayor
sorry.
Bain, would that? I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to mention. I just wanted to ask her: is there not a situation in Coral Gables right now along the same lines? The city's being sued for all this.
Well, the city's
Let's
suing
clean up.
FPL. And whether, I don't know if FPL has countersued them yet,
I'm not sure either.
but we'll see how that turns out.
Go ahead.
Well, so the question also, Sarah, is would a tree be grandfathered in? Would a tree that is existing be required to be removed if it is if it's a problem for the power line, or is it just new planting?
Can I answer that? It's my opinion that it would be up to the for us to change that in the ordinance. We could say in the ordinance to grandfather it in, or we can say it should be removed.
Okay.
I think that's just part of the legislation of what we can and can't do. Until we figure out what we're going to try to participate to do this as fast as we can. But I think that as long as we agree up here, and with your input to go ahead and do that, I think that we can make that determination. But in my mind, I would think that I would just say we could. I don't know how it would be voted on, but I think we can do that.
I think we can. I think it also becomes a matter of budgeting, and
We're talking about private properties.
okay, because before we were talking about the right of way.
Yeah, but
So
but
I don't. The
Well,
question.
I'm talking right-of-way alley that says that we could require a setback on the alley.
in other words, he's talking about in private property
Right.
for the people to plant a tree with a setback from the line.
Right. That we definitely need to look at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then also if we want to grandfather the trees that are there now, or have them remove that tree, or even if it's possible to put it somewhere else. You know what I'm saying? If
Well,
the tree can be moved without
Mayor,
killing it.
I mean, with all due respect to this good idea, I'm wondering how in the world we would enforce this, because it would require someone to drive the alleyways of Miami Springs and decide which trees should stay and which trees should be removed.
I think we've done that, haven't we?
I don't know. No, we haven't.
over the years,
We have a tree inventory. I'm sorry, Mr. Best. We have a tree inventory, but I don't think that has anything to do with.
Well, not every alley has power lines.
That's true.
Okay, and I think that I think that if Mr. Nash is given the opportunity to go look around, he
The
can.
manpower?
I don't know. I don't know. We're only 3.1 square miles. We're not that big.
We're not that big.
We're not that big.
It's a labyrinth, though.
Tom, you can do that.
I think he can do it.
He can add
I
it
mean,
to his list.
he's picked up all these branches and everything. I think he can, with some help, maybe
Well-
with some volunteer help, as far as
But
as the board helping him going through different putting board members in if they're willing or somebody's willing to put out a team under his supervision. Everybody take a corridor or a square and where power lines are and put down what's there, wasn't there, put it into the database and go ahead and do it. I mean, I'm open. I hope tonight that we don't have anything that we can say that we can't do. I want to be a positive situation that what kind of ideas that we can do.
Right.
And if, because Lynn brought this up to me about having, when the hurricane came by, about have stationed people to help out as far as different things when we need emergencies. Well, in this case, maybe in her area, she takes 10 blocks and so on, or volunteers that would like to do that and just mark down what homes and where we're at, and then evaluate with Mr. Nash and the board of what should stay, what shouldn't stay, and maybe evaluate what kind of an ordinance we should have.
well,
Could I ask, when we're talking about trees and alleys that are on private property, are we going to cut them down for the owner at our cost, or are we asking the owner to
yeah.
pay to cut them down? Because I
That's-
think that
That's
for
what I
a
was
lot
going to
of
say.
people,
With the financial burden.
well, I think there's going to be a lot of people who say that's no problem. I have no problem getting the tree out of there because I know it's a burden, but I'm not paying for it.
Right.
So, and there's going to be a few who are going to be adamant they don't want the tree removed, and we can deal with those separately. But the big issue is the ones that are saying, sure, get rid of it, but I'm not paying for it. Are we willing to do that?
Well, I think I can safely speculate that the city can't afford to do that.
No.
Okay.
That is an enormous cost. If 90% of the damage came from residential, and the city spends all of its money for pruning, trimming, and removal, $100,000 a year in the budget, if that's what we spend, and that's just city trees, which had nothing to do in any problem whatsoever, I mean, mostly no problems at all in damage to the power lines, we would use up that $100,000 in a week.
Yeah.
Mr. Ritchie, let me, Heidi, look at section 5403 of the tree ordinance code, and in the definitions, it defines public way includes all public streets, roads, boulevards, alleys, and sidewalks.
That answers that. Never mind.
And then if
Sarah.
you look at section 5404 under D, it says no tree shall be planted under pre-existing utility lines that will grow to a mature height of more than 24 feet or within 20 feet of such a power line. So it's already in the code.
Yes, but I think, yes, Mr. Best.
5405.
I'm sorry.
No, Eric, I was just going to mention.
5404.
Do you recall?
54. D.
It's a few years back. I forget how many years ago, but Tom, you'll remember this. we had a thing with Public Works where they went through the alleys to trim back everything, and we had a lot of problems with people complaining that they cut us back to. Tom Nash well knows what I'm talking about. Is this going to put us back into the same situation as that if we were to legislate this? I mean,
Well, we
no trees
I
that
think
people plant.
I think the alleyway. We have two alleyway problems. One, get the trucks through.
Right.
That means you've got to get 17
Right.
feet back.
Right.
And that's mostly the height of a garbage truck. That's not a power line. So the next problem is a tree that's above a power line.
Like 24 feet, stuff like that.
I don't know. Is that
Right.
how tall the power line?
24?
So
The power lines generally are running between 35 feet in overall height. And then also, it also depends on the power that's supplied in those lines. They have a 3-foot, 5-foot, 10-foot, and 20-foot rule of thumb, depending on the voltage that's in the primary wires, is how they set out for that pruning.
So then the immediate concern, the short-term concern, and the short-term, by short-term I mean including next hurricane season, is what do we do now, right? What changes do we want to make in the ordinance? As far as I think, I don't know, it sounds the way Mr. Alonso is talking is that we have jurisdiction over the alleys, and that could mean that we could say something about setbacks. But Ms. Mitchell's point about the cost burden, I mean, where does that, what happens there?
Well, I mean, we throw out ideas, okay? We throw out maybe incentives. We throw out the situation of the education that you're talking about, educating the people of their backyard and their trees, and somehow some kind of incentive that to think about removing a tree and replanting a tree. Maybe if you remove a tree, maybe we can supply them with the sapling that they would want. I mean, to make it a situation where it doesn't impact the city as far as cost goes, but gives the homeowner an opportunity to abide by the new ordinance and so on, and go like that. And then also educate the people that I've been up at our place there in Opelika. They're putting in the big cement power poles. They're taking care of it all for the hurricane. So I get to talk to all these fellas from FP&L and the other Pike and all of them, and they were telling me the stories of Miami Springs about how when they try to come over here, this is part of education, how they try to come over here and have to fix a tree here in Miami Springs and get actually harassed to the point where they just leave.
Yes.
They don't need to go. And I think that we have to stand up for what's right, and they're just as responsible, talking to the CEO of Florida Power & Light when he was here in our city. They're just as responsible for trees as we are.
Yes.
They love them too, and they're not going to cut a tree or trim a tree unless it's absolutely necessary. And I think it comes down to the education of the people when they go to their backyards to understand that FP&L is not doing this but only for one reason, for health and safety. And maybe this goes back to the education part. And Coral Gables is, of course, they said the worst of them all. But so I think the one thing that you're saying from the board tonight is the education part of it, and then two is somehow with the property owner. I think we have to understand. If I'm looking at it the way I look at it, is somehow setbacks in the backyard under power lines, and also the trees that only grow 24 feet. And I think that could, if that could come into play, maybe that could be a successful situation. With the fact of maybe if council, we could come up with some kind of idea that the people that have the trees under the power lines, we can give them some incentive to remove them, or some kind of some kind of a program, or to make them feel better about why we're removing that tree or cutting it back without hurting it, or replacing.
Yeah, I want to anticipate a problem there, and I would also like to talk about an ancillary issue, which is when the property owner, the resident, removes a tree. That issue. The board, Parks and Parkways, had a lengthy discussion at our last meeting in which we understand that a policy for a tree removal on private property is a sticky issue. It was a sticky issue when we wrote the ordinance years and years ago. when John Cavalier was in your seat, and it was a big argument, like how much does the city government get to say about what goes on in somebody's yard? But you know, you can't have a moldy roof, you can't have a house that's, you know, the yard's got to be cut and so forth. So we have regulations, paint. But when the issue comes down to an individual making a decision from the city's point of view, that's a problem. That's a real problem. And we don't have a strictly written policy that says here's why the tree can be removed or not. So if Mayor Bain wants to put a swimming pool in his backyard, and where he has it there's a big oak tree, I think the Bain family has a right to have a swimming pool.
Right.
And I think they ought to be able to remove that tree, even though it's a protected, even a specimen tree.
Right.
But the decision, in that case, it's probably a fairly easy decision, but they're not always fairly easy. Some of them are very difficult. And the recommendation that we made was we need to hire a serious level landscape architect / arborist who could write a policy that would be more specific than anything we have. Because if the call comes to Public Works, which is to say it comes to Tom Nash, he's going to make a call. And I can tell you from experience, it's going to come off as subjective. Right. Because it depends on the tree, the location of the tree, the size of the tree, the type of the tree. There's all of this that goes into it. And it's a no-win situation. He's never going to make the right decision. He's either going to make the decision the city likes, or he's going to make the decision the resident likes.
But
and they're in conflict.
But
or the other recommendation that we have was that when we did Tree City USA requires a tree board. The city of Coral Gables has one. The city of Atlanta, if you read their ordinance, it'll blow your mind who's on that board. It's ridiculous. But the tree board would say that tree cannot be removed, or that tree can be removed. This is the mitigation. But to put it on one guy, and I'm not talking for Tom Nash. Tom Nash talks for himself. But anybody in his position who has to go out and make that decision is going to make the decision based on so many variables that it's just
not fair to him.
Damn near, it's not fair to him. It's not fair to the residents. It's not fair to the city. So that's a big part of what council. I mean, the council needs to decide is how we're going to make those determinations.
Eric, I can through the chair, if I might. I remember after the last windstorm that we experienced, the city manager called me in the afternoon and says, "Can you meet me at Oriole, like 500 Oriole, wherever it was?" And I went over and met him. Rebecca Sosa was there, county commissioner, and there was a dog and pony kind of thing. But I went over there, and when I got there, Willie said to me, "Take a walk with me out back, will you, for a minute?" You remember this? And he goes, "This is the biggest problem we have in this town relative to windstorms." And he showed me in the backyard these trees that were clearly planted within the yard. These are 20, 25-foot trees that had fallen over and taken out the power section. And the reason I bring this up is because that was the last matrix in town to get power back.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
So I think this is part and parcel of what we have to think about here as far as putting something in place. I think it's got to be put on the homeowners. I agree with you 100% that your education pitch is spot on. We got to figure out how to do that.
Well, as Mayor Bain said, this is a gathering of ideas.
Now, I would say that after right now, if I was wanting to make a decision tonight, I think number one, the education part for the resident is number one. Number two, I like your idea of hiring I don't care for the board that picks and chooses trees to cut. I'm with you at that. But I think that's a decent idea to hire a firm or what'd you call it, landscaping firm to come in and
Landscape architecture.
yeah, to come in and
Expert.
say basically what they may be doing in new cities that are startup, what kind of trees they put in to mitigate this situation. I think that's a legitimate idea that we can go ahead and press on. And I didn't know he thought that way about. I didn't know you thought that way about the private ownership to have their understanding what they can and can't do under the government's nose. You threw me across the lake there. I didn't know that you
Well,
were like that, but I say
May I
that.
temper those remarks with?
I know.
Billy, it's
and
called a curveball.
I know he threw it, boy, and I missed. But I say this to you, to people. I've been here a long time. Going. I find that people in this city, a major majority of them, love trees in their yard and outside the yard. They do. And I believe sometimes we restrict them from the ideal of removing a tree, but knowing that in my mind, they always want to replace it anyway. But there's been many situations as mayor when I go to a home and people had a tree planted. One of them was planted in the front yard. It was growing in the front yard. It was actually growing right into the spigot. And it was growing straight up the house, so they couldn't use their water spigot for their hose on the outside. And what I've always felt was they wanted to remove it. And the city fought them at that particular, this goes back 10, 12 years ago. The city fought them on removing that tree. Well, the elderly lady, they have the money to remove that tree and also mitigate and pay money for it. But like she said, I'd like to remove this tree. I don't mind planting another tree, but I got to get this because it was also affecting her roof, you know.
Well,
And I'm just giving you a situation.
I hear you very clearly.
Yeah.
But I mean, we have codes, and when somebody wants to go against the code or get a waiver, they have a place to go.
Yeah.
To be heard.
Yeah.
The ear of the city is in that
Right.
board. But there's nothing like that for trees.
Right.
And I know situations where there's a tree on city property, the homeowner doesn't want it there. I don't want that tree there. Well, you know, the tree was there maybe when you bought the house.
Right.
You know that it comes with the property, and Tree City USA, which is valuable to us, and protecting our canopy,
Sure.
which is valuable to us. If my next door neighbor cuts down 3, 4, 5 trees in his yard, the value of my property is diminished a little bit. You know.
Yep.
So
Eric, I see a few things here that I just want to run by you and Tom. First of all, as far as low-hanging fruit, I'm guessing, and I don't know, but I'm guessing that there are a lot of residents who would be more than willing to cut down the trees in the backyard that might pose a hazard if they knew about it. You know, they've just never thought about it. The point that you made of, you know, you buy a house and there's a black olive in your swale and it's been there all along. Well, it's the same thing. I bought a house, you know, and those trees have been in the backyard for 25 years, and now you're asking me to spend thousands of dollars to cut them down. I really see the cost as an issue because I think cutting down trees, I haven't paid to get one cut down, but I imagine that it's not $100, that it's in the thousands, could be. So I don't see how we can ask residents who don't have that kind of money to all of a sudden, you know, cut down the tree that's been there for 25 years. I think that's a really sticky issue, regardless of how good the intentions or the results would be. But those are going to be some areas of Miami Springs, some homes. There's other homes that I'm sure probably wouldn't be that expensive to cut it down. They just need to know that that's an issue. Somebody to bring it awareness of, in this area, these power lines are important. How do we get that information across and get started doing the easy stuff?
Well,
yeah, well,
Yep.
one of the things we could do is if there's a tree under a power line that's dangerous, we could and it's a protected tree, we could say waive mitigation. Just because of the location of the tree under the power line, not for any other tree in your yard.
Right.
Because if we don't protect the trees in the yard, we're not complying with
Tree City USA.
Tree City USA. And these are not all trees. We have our lists. We eliminated fruit trees some 5-10 years ago, and we've added the nuisance. We almost added black olive to the nuisance list. A nuisance tree.
I think we
There's-
did.
There's no mitigate. Yeah, we did.
Hmm.
We reduced the mitigation on black olive.
See, I think that I understand your point of view, but I think that as we run into this problem, there's two things. Okay, first of all, I don't want to get off of the situation. I think that we got to make a note that the education part. I agree. I think that we got to go ahead and at least shake our heads that maybe we ought to consider having a landscaper, a professional come in and maybe give us some help.
No, I think that makes an awful lot of sense.
Okay. Now, as far as as I spoke to the board that night about mitigation, it's a possibility. I'm not saying it's likely, but it's a possibility that you'll understand that the homeowner sometimes wants to remove a tree, but doesn't do it because of the cost of the mitigation. In other words, I could give you an example of my brother. He removed some trees and he had to pay $450 because he didn't want to replace the tree. He had to pay $450, or it might have been, I'm rounded off, to the city to replace the canopy. My thought is, and I brought this up and he expressed it, is in this situation, if we go ahead and by education and by putting out the process that the people that have the trees under the power lines, you might be surprised at some of the people that want to remove trees, but for instance, like when a hat rack tree is getting hat racked, that tree is considered dead, right?
It's non-viable. Considered
Non-viable.
non-viable.
But
More than a third.
right. But we fine them for that. We fine them for that, but we give no incentive to remove that tree because it's an inferior tree now. So we fine them for it, and it still stands in their yard, and it's no good. And maybe we make them pay a fine of $250, Tom. Maybe that $250 could go to the removal of the tree, which is what I'm trying to say as far as the removal and back of the power lines. If you tell them that we'll as he suggested, remove a tree that's in a power line, but we're not going to charge you any mitigation to help out the city. I understand your point. I don't want to put any burden on the homeowner as far as cost. We got to do the best that we can. But with this is kind of what I'm saying about incentives that you might have. Who knows, if you get 25% of the people to do it under these kind of standards, that's 25% of the trees that are gone. That's a start. And these are my thoughts. These are the thoughts I expressed at the meeting.
I want to speak to that so I don't forget.
Go ahead.
But if a resident wants to remove a tree near a power line, but the true reason he wants to remove the tree is that he wants to remove the tree, it has nothing to do with the power line, and it may not be a problem for the power line.
Right.
Then we have to consider going back to mitigation. And again, it's going to fall to one person, and I think we need to. I'm personally I feel very strongly about the council considering writing a policy that takes some of the pressure off public works.
Gotcha.
Because otherwise it won't. It's going to be a fight all the way to the finish.
There's our fourth one. And you would be willing to take the job as Tom's for $20,000 a year as Tom's assistant.
Right hand man. Right hand man.
But
no, on the back. You put on the back. Yeah, on the back, and we get you the. But that's another one. That's a legitimate thing to think about. Now in my mind, I have 4 things I would write down.
Mayor, if I may, I'd like to share my thoughts
Sure.
at some point. You let me know when.
No, all you have to do is.
Well, I don't
just
want to
like
interrupt
Speak.
anybody
he
else.
says, he says through the chair. Just say through the chair. You want to talk.
Go ahead and
Through the chair,
speak up,
through the
kiddo.
honorable mayor, through
Go ahead.
whoever it needs to be.
Go ahead.
So, I'm concerned at a whole gamut of different levels here. First of all, we're a Tree City USA, and we're saying that we value that designation. And words are words, and then actions, really, the actions that the city takes show whether we really value Tree City USA or not. Some of what I'm hearing right now, maybe we should just abandon Tree City USA designation, because we're talking about the trees, and we're talking about a lot of cutting down of trees. We're talking about
asking people on private property to cut trees, possibly carrying the burden of an expense. I have a tree that was really damaged during Irma, and I can't afford to finish cutting what needs to be cut 'cause I can't afford it. So if the city comes and tells me I have to do it, I'm sorry, I can't. You know, there's a saying in Cuba that says a dry coconut with no water, you know, you can't get water out of it, you can't get it, no money. So I think that that would put people in arms in this community to say that a tree anywhere on the property must be cut because we, the council, are changing the policy. I have a real issue with that. We're making all kinds of assumptions here that some people are willing and some people are not. We really can't make those assumptions here. And the bigger problem, what I keep hearing us talk about, is that we have cabling that's up there on those poles for that FPL, that maybe if we took a serious look at the city investing or taking some kind of an opinion. I gave documentation the other day from the League of Cities. There was a presentation and other communities that have put all that underground for us to explore that. And we had other things coming up, but I would love to have them come and do a presentation so that we can at least explore that. Because then we wouldn't have to be talking about cutting trees down.
Councilwoman, point well taken. But I will mention, and I think this was like 8 or 9 years ago, we sat up here, the council was in place at the time, and we explored that.
I know. I know that.
$85 million to bury lines. $85 million. We said, you know what? Done deal. We're not going there.
But we need to start considering how much money on an ongoing basis we're spending on the tree situation and the mitigation situation and all of this. And when they talk about education, I was here at their last meeting, and the type of education that I suggested to them is not to put it on connections, because you know what? I would say 3/4 of the people in Miami Springs don't read the connections flyer. I talked about putting up posters in the community in places where citizens frequent, like outside Milam's, outside the library, outside the community center, outside the women's club, where people see it all the time, like big colorful poster that in very plain language will educate people about the trees. That comes out at them.
There's nothing wrong. We can do that too. We can definitely do that too.
But it can't just be education where you
But I don't think that I don't think that the board, who very much love trees, are looking at it in a position of.
I'm not saying anything about the board.
No, but I'm not. But their suggestions about helping out with the power lines, I don't think that anybody here is trying to go ahead and not be Tree City USA. I don't think
we can't do
anybody
both. We can't be cutting trees and be Tree City USA. Read the designation.
I think we have a balance. Like everything else, there's a balance that we have to strike, and a lot of times the decisions aren't clear cut. I know what Eric was saying about Public Works having to always make the decision, and that they never make a right decision. Well, I think they always do make the right decision. It just may not be everyone's decision. Someone's going to be happy with it. And similar to the votes we do up here. We vote, and we vote what each of us think is the right decision. We're not going to make everyone happy, but nonetheless, that's the job, and that's the job that that Public Works has to do. It's a balancing act. It's always going to be a balancing act because we want to keep our Tree City USA. We all value that, but we also have a responsibility to make sure that in an emergency situation that our city is as best prepared as possible. We'll never be 100% prepared, but as best prepared as possible. And the power lines are something that brings our city down for days and could be weeks. We were very, very lucky with this hurricane. We didn't get a hurricane. We had a Category 5 coming straight toward us and veered at the last minute. So as bad as it was, and several people were without power for even a week, we really didn't get a hurricane. And we've really got to prepare as if we're going to get a hurricane next time, and could get a Category 5.
Well, go ahead, Lynn. So you don't mind if I let Lynn talk, Eric?
Oops. Lynn Brooks, 520 Falcon Avenue. Well, as a board, I know we're talking about removing the trees from the private citizens. I'm more about trimming, education about trimming, shaping, the trees so that when we do get these big storms, the wind just goes through them instead of taking them down. I think the private citizens you know, way more receptive to that, especially too, they don't want to lose their electricity.
Right.
It's a safety issue on top of all that, you know, fires and other trees going on other neighbors' yards. And I've seen some of the residents here, and I walk a lot with the dog, and there's some crazy trees in the backyard. You know, the ficus trees, which are bad trees and all that. So I also, we were talking about FP&L. I think they only do a 6-year program now, trimming and in the alleyway. And they used to do, I believe, a 3-year program, which would help us out a lot, going down the alleys and trimming the trees that are growing into the wires. So I don't know if we can, as a city, approach them, and because they too, you know, want the power on for the money. So that would be one of our other suggestions that we all talked about.
When was the last time that they did that survey? Do you know, Lynn, or the
For
FP&L?
the trimming of the trees, FP&L?
Has it been 3
I
years or
haven't
6
seen
years?
them in a couple of years.
They're here.
Oh, no.
They're
That,
here,
For
yeah.
the trimming.
They've been doing it quarterly. They send us.
I've seen them.
maps.
I've seen them.
They
I
send
agree
us
with you,
maps
Tom.
of grids or areas that they're working.
But are
They've
they
been
doing
here
it
extensively.
every 6 years or still, or
I
is
think
it
less.
quarterly?
I think less.
You know, the FP&L wants to be out of the tree business. We unfortunately put them in the tree business, but what they do is they come in and they do a 3 to 6 year trim depending on the type of vegetation that they're going to be cutting. And what they do is they make the trees and the vegetation safe enough for the property owners, city, private, business owners, from that point on to carry on the maintenance. If we continue what the keeping or maintaining the trees where they've taken them back to, we won't have this issue.
Right.
I particularly am not fond of some of the cuts and the way FP&L leaves some of the trees, because in my opinion and in past experiences, they actually leave the trees in a more hazardous condition. And then that comes to how many trees can you go in and do a restoration pruning on. And then that also, like I said, would put a burden on a resident who's going to maintain going through and ensuring that the residents are going to keep these trees maintained. They look out the backyard, oh, FP&L cut my trees, I'm good for 3 years. They don't do anything in between the 3 years.
Right.
3-4 years later or something in between, you know, we still have the same issue.
Let me ask you a question. Just if residents actually trimmed the trees before the hurricane season and trimmed them correctly, what percentage of the damage would have been reduced, in your opinion?
You know, there's a lot of mitigating factors with that. It depends on the overall health of the tree. It depends on the tree's environment. It depends on the type of tree, the density of the tree. I remember a few years ago, I think it was with Wilma or Katrina, VG spent a couple $100,000 before the storm. They ran street by street, and hurricane pruned all their trees, and they had just as much devastation over there as we did. It depends on the velocity of the storm, the twisters, the dynamics. I mean, there's no number that you can put on that. I mean, we had just a little bit of a storm, but even generally with when these summer storms come through here, we generally have some form of damage somewhere.
Tom, I think the manager's statement has merit, though.
Right, but I mean, it'll just minimize the debris, but it's not going to stop it.
Would it help?
Yeah, it'll just minimize the amount, the quantity, correct, but you're still going to have debris.
Tom, is the thinning, like Lynn was saying, the thinning of the trees, is that significant instead of just cutting them down, thinning them? That would reduce the damage. Because it seems like thinning trees would be pretty difficult for most homeowners. You'd have to get up high. It's
Well, I
something
mean,
that
if
would
you
require
do, depending on the
professionals.
type of trees, you could do reduction cuts. You can do thinning out. You can lift them. We get criticized no matter how we trim out a tree. Realistically, there's no real way to trim a tree. It's always going to be up to somebody's interpretation on whether it was done right or wrong. One of the things that we had here in this city, and we're going to have it moving forward, is after Andrew, Wilma, Katrina, we never were able to go out and properly restore those trees. So you may see a tree from the outside and it's big, it's beautiful, it's green, it's lush, it's thick, but then when you go under the tree and you look in it, you've got a lot of dead wood, rotten wood, crossing limbs, branches that were damaged in other storms that are hollow. And then you go in there now and you try to restore that tree or at least make it safe. Next thing you know, 60% of that tree is gone because you're trying to eliminate the potential hazards that are there. Now you've overpruned the tree, or you've damaged the tree, or you've killed my tree. You know, so these are all the different things that we look at on a daily basis when we go out there.
I think with the project we have going on in Westford Drive right now, I think there's evidence of that, exactly what you're talking about. Some of these trees that were cut down to accommodate the path, if you look after they cut some of those down, almost 12 inches in the middle of some of these trees, the big guys that were cut down, dead.
Right. Well, some of the trees on Ludlam, when they took the pines down, I'm half the weight I was back then when they took the trees down, and some of those trees I could have stood in the middle of them.
Yeah.
That's how hollow they were.
Yeah.
You know, but I mean, you don't know until you get in there.
Right.
But I hope that that we're not here I hope that I think Eric understands it. This meeting tonight isn't to not be Tree City USA,
no.
And it's not to. It's just a meeting to try to understand that if we can, maybe we can't. I don't know. Just Mother Nature is Mother Nature, but maybe we can somehow mitigate the problems that we had. I mean, remember, Irma came through here September 8th, and we're still picking up debris, and it's November 14th. November 14th, and the reason I went to the board and I tried to get this started up here is to try to have a comprehensive plan on how to continue to give the oxygen, the foliage to the city in maybe in a more responsible way. And that's my only motivation here. It is not to remove trees and to not to go ahead and not be Tree City USA. It's also a health and safety situation in the part of a storm. These are my thoughts and these are my motivations. It's not to just arbitrarily cut things down and not create a situation with Tree Cities USA. And I believe that, and maybe you can answer this question, there's got to be some kind of provision in Tree City USA for a catastrophic situation where it allows you to adapt, to reassess how you want to do your tree plantings within your city and still be Tree Cities USA. Is that true?
Well, that's an excellent point. And as I was sitting here listening, I thought to myself, well, why not? And I would be fully willing to volunteer to do the research with Tree City and find out, hey, here's our situation.
Right.
We're not Springfield, Missouri.
Right.
We're in a hurricane zone.
Right.
And we have problems. You need your advice. Maybe it would be as simple as asking.
Right.
And I'd be more than willing to take that on. I mean, it's easy enough for me to do that.
And Eric, perhaps that information that you find could be useful to other communities in South Florida or in Florida who are experiencing
suffering the same
yes.
thing.
Yeah, we
Exactly.
could be a leader in that.
It might be something that they need to look into for, areas that are prone to hurricanes, of Tree City USA making certain provisions for that.
Well, I sincerely believe that Tree City USA is about percentage of your city's canopy. You don't even qualify to apply unless you have a certain density. Do you know it?
Yes. 30?
I think it's a percentage. Yeah, no, I think it's more than that.
But we were once 70%, but we're no longer 70%.
No.
But we're
only
required to spend $2 per capita per year on trees. I think it's planting
Or more.
additional trees, because if you take some canopy out, you're supposed to put some canopy back.
Are we doing that? Are we
to
doing
the no, we're not. We can't. Because the storms are taking out more than we can possibly replace with our budget. If the city said, okay, well, we're going to cut back on everything else and we're going to plant, you know,
I think we have
10,000 trees.
Eric. I think we have been diligent in terms
We have
of.
been. No, there's no question about that. The council's always been good with money for trees, but it's not sufficient.
No.
And we, as I said earlier, we're
Well-
still trying to catch up from Andrew,
Right. And again,
which means we will never catch
it
up.
goes like in a forest. Like in a forest, you know, you have a tornado go through and it goes right. You can see where it went through.
Well, like I think what you're implying is Tree City USA says protect the canopy.
Sure.
But there are mitigating circumstances in certain different environments in this country.
Just
that-
like, right.
that
Just
need,
like
we need guidance from them on that.
Sure, and
right?
that's what I would say. I would think that they got to be they're people who wrote this Tree City USA have to have provisions of a catastrophic situation, and if go ask them, I think that's my fifth thing on the list.
Well,
Yeah.
And see
Well,
what they come
I would
up
like
with.
to offer too, for those people here that may not know what Tree City USA is, it is recognized nationally
Right.
for people who are looking to relocate in a different community. Sometimes that is a big
Is a-
part of their decision. Is the tree a shaded city?
Right.
Is the city a shaded city?
Right.
And that's important.
So, Eric, I'm happy to share with you. I have a binder with all of the information on Tree City as recent as 2 months ago because I did some research on that, and I'd be happy to hand that over to you. But I have a question. The money that has been budgeted for trees from the last budget, is that being used in its entirety for trees right now?
The
For
fif-
replacing trees and stuff like that? Because I think that this would be a year when we really could not cut back on any of the money that we have allocated for trees. I'm not sure. Just some clarification on that?
There's $50,000 in the budget that we have every year for tree planting. I think the decision at this meeting is, do we continue the way things were? Do we change the type of trees that we're planting in the city? I thought those were some of the things that we needed to decide tonight or discuss tonight.
Right.
Well, it's William. That's a good point, and I recall.
Yeah, the reason
No,
one of
no,
the reasons
exactly.
I'm saying is because I know I heard a lot of people say, "Well, don't plant any more Royal Poincianas."
Right.
Because those easily come down.
They fall over.
So those are things that we need to discuss
Well,
as to.
Well,
Well,
black
I think
olives,
that's a
sea
recommendation.
grapes, stuff
That's a
like this.
recommendation that would come from the Park and Parkway boards to come through to us.
That's easy.
Yeah, and come to us and tell us that no matter what we say going forward, we got the consideration for the setback in the alleyway of the private property, and then what trees should be allowed to be planted under power lines.
Right.
And
We have that.
and the research of what trees can't handle a hurricane.
Well, for the residents who are here tonight, I think there's something they should know. The council budgets $100,000 for trimming and removing, and with $100,000 we can do between 50 and 150 trees depending on the problems that they have. So if you think about it, it's about, I mean, if you take if it's 100, which is the median rate, so it's $1,000 a tree. $50,000 is used to purchase and plant and guarantee the survival of trees, and that's once a year, and that gets us between 80 and 100 trees. So you can see how that works too. And the trees have to be to spec, they have to be a certain species of tree, they have to be a certain size, and so on and so forth. A street tree is different from a yard tree. And the specifications for street trees have to be adhered to. So we have to find those trees, get them in the ground, and protect them until they survive. So at 80 trees a year, 80 to 100 trees a year, let's just say it's 100 trees a year. At 100 trees a year, how many trees did we lose this time? Yeah, 1,000 in the hurricane and the tornadoes.
Right.
So we're never going to catch up.
We'll
Never going to happen.
We'll catch up if we can. We also get some trees donated too.
Well, that would be nice, but normally donations aren't they aren't spec to.
Well, I'm going to throw out this idea, and it's always gone nowhere. But I've always thought that if part of the golf course, if we could go ahead and get a nursery in here and use part of the golf course that
Like a
part
tree
of the golf course, have the nursery come in here, they could use our property to
tree
grow
farm?
trees, and with that, we can't make any money off of it because of the stipulation with the city of Miami. But we could allow them to put their trees there and allocate so many trees a year to us for using that property to go ahead and supply trees to us, but only keep green here. I've mentioned this, I don't know, I've been up here a long time. This may be the 8th time I mentioned it, but I've never got anybody to go ahead on this dais to agree with me to try to research it.
Mayor, let me remind you that we now own the golf course, so I think we have control of that now.
But we still have to watch if it's not
Right.
golf course related. If we make any profit, half of that goes to the city
That's
of
correct.
Miami
That's
still.
correct.
But I think that like on the from the Curtis Mansion area all the way down Deer Run to the Bamboo, how many acres that is? If maybe a nursery would come in here and want to keep oaks there, and would the stipulation would be to grow oak trees, the oaks we want, or grow oak trees, and they give us 20 trees a year for that, or whatever we could work out. The other places are in the back of. We can't do about the driving range, but in back over there, where we let's see. There's some room in the back, I think 14, that they changed the sides. I haven't been there so long.
Paul knows. He's
Paul,
back here.
Paul, what
Hunting lodge?
where the canal is, where you have the little bridge, that area is back in there. That's the 17th hole. Okay, 14, 15, 17. There's a lot of old Australian pines. They might even come in and remove them and use that all that area to
At
do
that and literally back in the back of the driving range, all the way back, there's plenty of land still back
So
there.
I mean, that's something
that
that
would be a great idea.
that's
yeah.
something that we can consider. Maybe have staff contact nurseries or see if they would want to use, and maybe we can use 20 or 30 or 40 acres of the land and grow trees and
Space all the way down the right side of the driving range as well. That's all
so,
barren.
and the people that live on the golf course would love that.
Yeah,
The
that
squirrels
sounds
would love
wonderful.
it. And you know, maybe we could do that. Maybe now we have we have a little sense to create even more trees in the city. It could qualify for Tree City USA. You're planting 40, 50 acres of property.
Yeah.
So
We got plenty of land to plant trees.
so
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, you got. I mean, there's a lot of enclaves. That's
Yeah.
the trouble.
There-
That's the trouble with
We have 212 acres.
212
The average
acres
golf course
is
is 140.
you got an acre and a half here, an acre and a
Do
half
the math.
there.
Yeah.
I mean, there's space in there.
so I mean, if council's willing, maybe we can instruct the staff.
I think we
to-
should. I think we should explore that.
explore
I
that.
think we should explore that.
Thank you.
I like it.
Sounds like a good idea.
I like it. I like it, Mayor.
Going back to well, getting, because I think we're going in two directions. One is Tree City, you know, to put in more trees, and then the other thing is trying to figure out how we minimize, after a storm, you know, get our community. Really, what we're talking about is recovery. You know, how quickly we can recover after a hurricane. And it's nice to sit up here in air conditioning and say, you know, it's not that big a deal, but you know, every day without electricity in summer is like 1,000 years. So it's really important to try to bring our community to recovery as soon as possible. So going back to the issues with the trees behind on private property, on power lines and stuff, some of the things that we discussed, I agree with Councilwoman Zapata about there's just, I don't see how we could ask homeowners we can ask them to do it, but not to require them to remove a tree on their property. The cost is just exorbitant, and that's something that, you know, most people don't have that kind of cash lying around to pay somebody to work on their trees. But to encourage it, and one of the things that I was thinking about while we're sitting here talking is, if I have, my house doesn't have an alley, but if my house had an alley and I had trees back there that could damage the power lines, I'm probably not the only one there that's going to be affected. There's probably people up and down my alley who are in the same situation. So if perhaps with initiatives, we've been talking about initiatives, is getting people in on a block to look at their alley and talk to other homeowners, similar to the solar co-op presentation that we had, and talk to other homeowners in their alleys and say, look, let's try to cut this down so if a hurricane comes, we've minimized the possibility that our blocks will be out of power.
So what you're saying is like partnership in the problem with the neighbors? Is that what you're saying?
With education, with what we're saying of education, but really, if one homeowner starts doing it and talks to their backdoor neighbor and says, I'm trimming down mine because I don't want this power down, we may, I'm not saying we'll solve it 100%, but we may get some momentum there
Well,
and
you
take
can have
care
a-
of, again,
a
the
work-
low-lying fruit to
You
solve
can have
these
a
problems.
workshop for the people that want to volunteer, sort of like Crime Watch. You have a Crime Watch captain for each block and all that. You could do something like that. And then that would also add to the education and everything else.
But it would
Or at
literally-
least bring to their attention that this is a concern.
It would literally
and
be like
make
a
'em react to it.
campaign, you know?
Well,
And if you're having a tree person come to cut yours and, your neighbor over there, he might give you a better price because he's doing a whole bunch of them there too, so.
I think
Very
what
good.
Councilwoman Zapata is saying is that it's not so much, it's education, but what I hear you saying, and I don't speak for you, but it's a campaign.
Yes, to get
It's a
buy-in
big
from people.
campaign. The city gets behind it.
Mhm.
The poster she's talking about, lively, articulate, clear, that would be the first start part of it. And there's, I don't know if this would go to the I doubt it would go to the education board, but it would, some group of people could come up with what the campaign would be, so that it's not I'm 38 years in the classroom. Education is slow. It's not, you don't do it today. You do it over a year, or you do it over 10, 12 years. It's a long process. And so I would bet you that 50% or more of the residents of Miami Springs don't even have any idea we have a tree ordinance. They probably don't even know you have to have a permit. They say, well, there's a tree in my yard and I don't want it here. I need to cut it down. That we need to overcome that.
But also, I agree. It's coming back to the incentive of trying to incentivize people to do it. But there's been times, I don't know if Mr. Nash can tell me. There's been times where people wanted to remove the tree on their own in the swale, like a black olive. They've come up, said they'll pay the bill.
Correct.
But we don't have any incentive for them to do that. In other words, they can't. If the black olive is no good in the swale, it's a no good tree, and the city can't afford it. We interfere with the fact that they would cut that tree down for us. They might even plant another tree for us in that.
The city's done this, Mayor.
No.
Yeah, they have.
That happens. And one of the other things that deters people also sometimes is the mitigation, like we discussed a little earlier. I'm not sure how much you guys are fully aware of the mitigation, but on the protected trees, for every 4 inches of trunk diameter, it's $400 or one tree. So if you have a 20-inch tree, goes into 5, that's $2,000 or 5 trees that you have to put back on your property to take one out.
Yeah.
And in some instances, there's not enough room on that one property to accommodate 5 trees, and then someone's saving for a driveway or wanting to put in that pool, and then here you hit them with the cost of removing the tree, which they've already budgeted, and then, the mitigation on top of it, it's.
Well, this goes back to her concern,
Right.
and her concern about asking people to remove a tree. Maybe, as you heard the facts of how much mitigation costs. If a person wants to remove a tree to help the city out for the power lines, and the tree's a dimension where it's going to cost them $2,000 to mitigate, if we waive that mitigation fee, maybe the homeowner can remove that tree and replant another tree and help out the situation.
I think you're.
It goes to the fact of what you guys were talking about last night about solar, about waiving the permit fees.
Right.
So I guess I can express it that way. Maybe you understand. If you allow to help out the city with the campaign, of the strategy of everything, and you go ahead and waive the mitigation fee for people, we would ask them, not tell them, if they would like to remove a tree that's underneath the power line, and we'll waive the mitigation fee. Maybe it could be an affordable thing for them to do. Now, that doesn't mean they have to do it. I don't want, like Councilwoman Sabah, I'm not trying to tell them to do it, but maybe it might be a snowball, like you said earlier, that if somebody does it, maybe another person will do it, and have the opportunity to replant with the setback that we desire.
Oh, I think this is.
I'm just looking, it's just a.
No, I think you're right, Mayor. I think you're right. I think that's where we need to go in this meeting in terms of establishing something, how we want to move forward with it.
A suggestion.
Go
Yes.
ahead.
Well, and another thing about possibly getting trees donated, there is the Adopt a Tree program. I don't know, I didn't go fully into it, but my husband had mentioned it. And it's actually a citizen will buy a tree, sponsor it, maintain it, and I think, we have a lot of people that love trees here. I think that might be a way to also
That's a thought.
campaign for positive enforcement, reinforcement for people to want to contribute and maybe get more happy with the, trimming their trees and things like that. So.
Right. Go
Thank
ahead.
you, Lynn.
I want to add, I'm not a proponent of cutting any trees. First of all, I hear that we lost 1,000 trees. We only have enough money for 100. So I'm not sure why we're going to start cutting trees down. But I was one of those that was unfortunate enough to be without power for 5 days. I was really upset those 5 days. But now that I've had time to think about it, 5 days is not a big deal considering keeping our canopy. But I'm listening to you guys and what you all could do to help out and give these residents an incentive would be, there's two prices, right, Tom? When you cut down a tree. If you cut down the tree and you leave it there, it's one price. Or if they have to haul it away, now the price goes up. What you all can do is maybe we pick up the tree and they cut down the tree to help incentivize these trees that are under power lines, to help these residents with the cost of cutting down these trees.
That's good.
Should we, Councilman Petrolanda, should we, according to what you're saying, are you suggesting that we establish some type of a program to identify the ones that are of concern? Is that part of this, maybe?
That's not what I'm saying. That's what you all been saying.
Oh, no, I know.
Yeah,
I know it.
Yeah, absolutely. But the cost, because we're saying that it's going to cost too much for these residents. A lot of people. I myself have 2 trees in the background under the power lines.
Yep.
I was fortunate enough for them not to topple over the power lines. But those are 2 trees that if I had to cut down, they're going to have 2 prices. One, if they leave it in the back and we pick it up, the city picks it up, or if they have to haul it away. So
Tom?
maybe that's how we can help the residents.
Well, Tom,
to
we
cut
have
on the
bulk
price.
trash pickup for the residents now, right?
Right.
The only thing is, if it's a large tree, we would charge them for excess load.
Right. We give one
Over and
half
above.
of our truck at no charge per resident. Anything above that, if it's a full load or a load and a half, then they get charged like $85 per each half load.
That would be my case, because I have 2 large trees right on the power lines.
Right.
So if we can just waive the cost and we just take them away, maybe that'll help incentivize these owners to, well, we endure the cost of cutting it, but the city will take it. It's not the full price for the city to cut it and haul it. So that's just something to think about.
Tom and Eric, can you give us an idea of how many, like, I don't know how to break it down, how big a problem this is of trees and alleys that are under power lines? Is it something that every single block has a situation like that, or
Probably.
how many trees in total? I mean, just how big is the problem?
I mean, it's been an issue my entire career here. Like Councilman Best said, we've been kicking that can for a long time. Part of the problem is you have property lines or fences that are on the property line, and then they plant on the outside of that fence line. They create hedges or screening, things of that nature. It could be trees, it could be hedges, it could be different types of foliage. We have a 16-foot easement back there. On our garbage trucks from outside mirror to outside mirror, we got 11 feet. We generally work within 14 feet of that, and half the time you can't see the front of our garbage trucks.
But that to me is a different issue than the
But all of
tree
it's
height
all-
under the power lines. One is, your trucks getting through alleys, which I know is a concern,
Right.
but that's not the trees under power lines.
I
that are-
would say that we probably have a rough guesstimate, probably about 60% of the city, we have some form of tree issue, whether it's in somebody's rear yard, close enough to the power pole, or directly in the alleyway
Yeah,
that are impacting the power lines.
I think it's at least that, Tom.
Can we summarize, or we have any other thoughts?
No, I'd like the education piece that was brought up earlier. I think that's important. How we can.
Are we having public speak?
I thought we were gonna have the public speak on the actions of the hurricane. That's what we're doing.
Okay, I thought somebody wanted to speak on the
trees.
I thought the public was invited.
Yep, but I was for the hurricane actions. I thought that's what we decided, that they would speak.
It said how we can improve, and
Right.
it said it in the paper.
Right.
Well, I'll give you the opportunity to speak. Keep
No,
it
we should hear from Donna, I think.
Go ahead, you could speak, but she only wants you to speak 3 minutes.
Oh, stop about the 3 minutes, will you?
It was 5.
Give you 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Thank you. I don't think it'd be that
Talk
long.
as long as she wants.
Donna Hernandez, 769 Pinecrest.
Whatever.
Being a tremendous tree lover, I do understand the trials and tribulations of the damage that they can do. I took some notes, so I'm just going to randomly give my thoughts on some of the things that were said. Number one, I had Lynn, you and I are speaking or thinking pretty much alike. Adopt a tree. I think that the city can save a lot of money with the adopt a tree idea. I know my school in alone would probably get you maybe a half a dozen there, and I know that there are many people who love trees, would gladly give $100 here and there to have a tree in their name. I know you, Mayor, you said something about the golf course to house some of the trees in a nursery. I was wondering if there would be any consideration of the big meridian on Dove, the area there. If anything, if we can get permission.
We can ask, but that
right.
You can ask.
Right. Well, I thought Dove, because I know there could be a lot of stipulations about the golf course. I've had several conversations with Tom in the past about the fact that we'll remove a very mature tree for one reason or another, and it will have approximately 1,000 square feet of canopy, and we'll put back a stick that represents maybe 50 square feet of canopy. And with that kind of replacement ratio, I think we're going to, in between that and the storms, we're going to quickly diminish that green triangle, so that really concerns me. I saw 2 huge oak trees that were planted on Westford Drive. Now that's replacing a tree. Those 2 oak trees, they represent the real replacement of what trees that we should replace, mature trees with, because within a year those 2 huge oak trees are going to represent a lot of canopy. They're going to do well versus the little rinky-dink things that are going to put in. Having a jungle in my yard, I would really resent the city coming to me and telling me that I had to take down some trees. Now, from Irma, I think I had my private little twister that just went right through my yard, and it took the top of several of the trees, mutilated them, and I had to chop them down. So the opportunity came where I had to take down a 40-foot avocado, a hybrid tree, a 50-foot hybrid tree fell down. I had to rip down 3 coconut trees that were mutilated. So it cost me $4,000 just to remove trees that were already mutilated. $4,000.
Insurance doesn't take care of that?
I have a $10,000 deductible.
If it hits your house, they'll take care of your house, not the tree.
Insurance would have taken care of it if you didn't have the deductible?
I
don't know. I don't know.
You know, they're all different.
Okay, all right.
If I would have had a 2,500, they all vary, the insurance policies.
Keep going.
Okay. As far as the mitigation fee, I have some input in that. And why don't you all consider, since we want to remain Tree City USA, when you're going to approve a tree to be taken down, why don't you look at the percentage rate of what they're leaving behind? My house, for instance, and I know Eric's house is full of trees. The fact that I took down my avocado, a mango, and two coconuts, you can't even tell that I took anything down because I am so populated with trees. But somebody who has 2 trees in their yard and says, I want to take this down, and they're leaving one, I think that's something that you have to take into consideration. So you need to have some kind of control over when someone says, I want to take this tree down. Because I go through streets in Miami Springs, and I see houses on Pinecrest. They don't have one canopy tree in their yard. I go through streets in Miami Springs, and there's not one canopy even in the swale area. And I think that sort of should be an ordinance, the fact that we're Tree City USA, that a requirement should be, well, you know, you got to have at least one canopy tree there in your swale area. Black olives, I have one in my swale area. Please don't touch it. It's a burden to those who park under it. I understand, but they are beautiful trees. If you Google black olive trees, okay, you will read that it says one of the most beautiful trees in Florida. Google it. Yeah. Now it may be somebody's sore thumb because they park their car under it, or there might be people that live in sterile environments that want a bleached out white sidewalk. Well, that's not what we're about in Miami Springs. An oak tree. The worst tree in my whole property is my oak tree. That sucker sheds like I pick it up one day and the next day it's all back.
Does it give acorns?
It's what?
Does it give acorns?
Acorns.
Yes.
Get out of here.
Do you get deer?
Yeah, it gives everything. I mean, when I walk out there barefooted, I'm doing a dance and everything, but I'm not going to remove it because it's sheds and it's dirty. Okay. Same thing with the Royal Poinciana tree. I have one in the school, but Councilwoman Mitchell, she said something during the hurricane that really touched me, and she said diversity. We have to have a city of diversity of trees. I like that. We can't have, we're only going to have oaks and we're only going to have this. Okay, that bothered. That really, I liked that. It was very good. Now to get to the meat. Okay.
That wasn't the
No,
meat.
that wasn't the meat. No, this is real quick. The biggest problem we have always is about money, of course. All right? For me to trim, when this storm came, I crossed my fingers and I prayed that my oak tree didn't go down because I had not pruned it. All right? To prune it was like $1,000. It's outrageous. Maybe I cannot. First of all, I want to say, Tom, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you only have 2 hands and 2 eyes. How can you have the oversee of every tree in here and how it should this tree it has a leg standing out of it. It's gonna topple on one side. I go through Miami Springs all the time and I see trees that are so out of kilter that need a trimming here, need a trimming. Why can we not, during the non-hurricane season time, why can't we bring in arborists who work under Tom in his supervision that are on call and will have a crew under them that will maintain these trees, at least in the swale area. And I saw a lot of trees go down on Westwood Drive. There was tababuyas. There were more oaks than anything that went down on Westwood Drive. The oak trees on the golf course, they took a beating. Okay, so it's not just one kind of tree that goes down. We already have agreed on that. All different kind of trees went down. So I think that the homeowner needs help with the price. Maybe if you have arborists that are willing to work with a neighborhood, that this neighborhood, they all want to do trimming. Maybe you can find arborists that will go and hit a neighborhood at a time. I know my neighbors, we have 1, 2, 3 blocks. I think the 3 of us, our 3 blocks, would all get together and say, let's hire this group that the city has filtered out. They're not going to gouge us in prices, and they will do a good job on pruning our trees. Now, in the past, my trees in the alleyway at the school, I would get a notice from the city that told me I had to cut the trees hanging over the alley for the trucks. It seems to me that's you got to just do the same thing with the trees that are interfering with the power lines, and just help the residents with the cost of that. Have more people during non-hurricane season time that will go out there and trim these things. Not a Chinese fire drill where everybody's racing 1 month before the hurricane to start trimming trees up. I think I'm pretty much done.
Like a program, Donna, right?
Yes, like a program. I think that it's very important that our town has a tree committee. I think that's real important. I think it would take a lot of burden off of you. I think it'd take a lot of burden off of Tom, and where people can confront you and say, I have a horrible tree, and I need help. There has to be a fun with that, but I think that's pretty much it. I hope that we are very careful with going too crazy about taking away the population of our trees, because they're not in the realm of the desirable trees, and like Councilwoman Zapata said, it's very costly, and like I said, these weren't pruning prices. This was cut your tree down price, which is cheaper than pruning. And by the way, 2 months before the Hurricane Irma came, I tried to employ one of the workers, the tree trimming people of this city, that is licensed to cut here, and I asked him if he would thin out my ficus trees at the school, and he told me no. He says, I will cut it down, but I won't thin them out.
Why?
They're important to me.
Thank you.
No, why
But
though?
They're important to me.
Why would he not?
I don't know. I don't know.
Interesting.
But they're important to me because they provide 50% of the shade in my playground. And that was his behavior. And I got a feeling it's because he's not qualified to prune a tree.
Well, then he did the right thing.
Yes, you're right.
He backed
But
away.
that's probably 80% of the people who cut trees here in this town. They are not arborists. And that's a real problem to the homeowners too.
Yeah.
Because they're getting these people that come in and say, I'll cut
They
your
get
tree.
excited.
And Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. You're welcome.
I'd like to say 2 things, and I'll stop too. If we did find someone who was, I don't know if you're going to find, we need somebody on the level of a lawyer's ability with language and an arborist's ability with understanding. But if the city says to the resident on the alley, we're looking at a setback, we could use the term highly recommended.
Right.
Now, to you and me, highly recommended means, well, we really think you should do it.
Right.
But if we had an expert in here, that highly recommended could be defined so specifically and carefully that it wouldn't be just it's our opinion or it's our wish. It's here, if you don't do it, here's what could happen. Your neighbors are going to suffer because of your trees, and so on and so forth. And on the other one, on adopt a tree that Lynn and Donna both spoke to, if you go around to the county or whatever services there, an adopt a tree, you're going to get a sapling. And that's not allowed to be planted on city property because it's not up to spec. The other idea I think that was implied was that, well, maybe a resident would say, I would like to donate a tree. Well, that's a good idea. That's a great idea. But that would be a tree that would cost a lot more than what you're going to get from a donated tree.
Gotcha. Okay. I think if we can get to some kind of summary, number one, education.
I think so. I think
Number
so,
two,
I think so, Mayor.
Number two, I think that Mr. Nash and
William?
administration can maybe research, like Mr. Eric said there, about an arborist slash some kind of a expert in landscaping, arborist type situation. That would
I'm
fit
sure the people from Tree City can
Right.
recommend.
Come in and
I think
yeah.
you're very important
do
for us, for you to go to Tree City, to come back to us and tell them what their ideas are about having a catastrophic hurricane, what they can do to help us. They might even be able to help us with funds and tree replacement. They might have a program for that. So that you do that. I think we got to consider, if we want to consider about the mitigation fee on removal, and the flyers and the different things. When I say education, I'm including the flyers that the campaign and the incentives to go ahead and help
Which
out.
would be starting now, and we're saying we're starting now
right.
preparing for the hurricane
Right,
season, because
right.
this is a long term, so the issue would be now
Right.
to get the
Get
information
something
across.
and have maybe Anna and
Off-season kind of thing.
Anna and would they watch this? Anna and
Tammy.
to come up with some kind of a not necessarily like she wants a. I think you still put it in your paper, but more at the centers of the women's club, like was mentioned here. Maybe the other thing is maybe we can look into a nursery using some of our property. But I mean, I'm not in a hurry.
No,
for that.
you know what? I like
Just
that.
the idea of it. Just see.
Along those lines, I like that thought.
And the Dove. I don't know what the ramifications from Dade County at Dove with the power lines there, but who knows? Maybe
No,
they'll.
that's a FPL property.
Okay, maybe FPL less trees under their lines. Who knows? But it's something. Nothing's to say no to. Everything's
Maybe-
to try to do.
Mayor, maybe they'll pay us to do it.
Everything here is to try to do the right thing and try to.
Let them help you choose the trees, I bet.
Thank you, Eric.
Maybe they will. We gotta ask them. Gotta ask everything.
Yeah.
One thing I learned is if you don't ask, you don't. All they can do is say no. One thing of when you ask for money for the city with the people above us, if you don't ask them, they're not going to work
But
for you.
I
You
think
gotta ask.
I think the other
What was
thing
the other ones?
the other thing is that we have to think about here before we leave tonight is those trees that are infringing on areas where they could affect power lines.
Well, that's what I mean.
No, I know.
yeah.
That are built on that I'm not sure how you legislate that.
Well-
I'm not sure if you do.
I'd rather initiatives not legislated. I think it's.
I know.
Well,
right.
you're going to have to legislate if you're going to go ahead.
Eventually, we're going to have to,
You're
but
gonna have
but I
to-
think we got to get
I-
there first. And
Look, I understand. As far as I'm concerned, I'm most I don't like to legislate.
no, you don't
for
like to tell
anything.
people what to do.
No,
I know that.
don't.
I know that.
But I agree with a recommendation or to pursue it with education through our people at schools.
Well, at
Tell
least
their
get
parent-
at
I mean,
least
I
get to the
understand.
at least get to the point where folks recognize that this is an issue.
Right. And
You have to
also-
get them to understand that.
But the most important, I think, if you can lessen the cost burden,
Well, that too.
that with the mitigation situation, you might find there be a lot of people that would not only remove a tree but would replace a tree of their liking, because it's up to them. And
Yeah.
the idea of hauling it, if we can help them out with, if they do cut a tree, if we could have, even if we haul half of it, this help them with a little bit of money. You understand? These are the incentives
Yep.
and the growth. Do you have it all written down? Do you? Well, there's more. Yeah, yeah. What do you got?
She's got it all. Don't worry.
Education campaign for the promotion of tree education. Research, arborist expert, mitigation fee in the ordinance to revisit that and to possibly look into using the city property for nursery, for growing trees.
Okay, that's more important. Also,
Yep.
also the setback in the backyard. of
The
how-
alleys.
The
The
setback.
alley
setback.
setback.
Rear
on the
se-
alleys that
rear-
have power lines.
Rear setback. Yeah.
So there are setbacks in the
Yep.
alleys. If we can
Yep.
that's part of the
Now,
legislation.
on the mitigation, what exactly are we only dealing with people who have trees that are under the power lines and they want to those?
If that's allowed, if you can, you gotta ask the attorney if you're allowed to specify, can you legislate for one but not for the other?
That's
Well, no,
In other words, if you're
I
gonna,
think what would happen would Tom would be the one to determine if the tree is
Right.
really
Right.
affecting the power line, and if he feels that that tree needs to come down, then the homeowner can do that, and the mitigation would apply
okay.
to that.
And that
If
should
that
fall
ca- if that-
under safety
Yeah,
or
right.
emergency or safety provisions, something like that, so you're making a decision.
Okay.
I
Well-
wanted to suggest to Eric and to William that when you're looking for
I had one other thing,
information,
I forgot.
I'm sorry, that
No,
you,
I'm
oh.
talking to myself.
that you contact in addition to for resources, University of Florida, the co-op down in Homestead, the Homestead Co-op, they have a lot of arborists and horticulturists and stuff who
That's a good idea.
yes,
Mhm.
yes,
Camel
and reach
Park.
out to them. They may be able to help us. I'm sure they're getting calls from other cities with similar issues, and they're a free resource, so perhaps they can lead us with information on somebody to help us with this instead of having to pay for an arborist.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to see if you can, when you get a chance, if you go out, and if this is possible, you go out and you look at actually how many trees are on the power lines that you feel like they need to be taken down, whether they're in private property or public property. Now, if it's not a whole lot of them, okay, and we can say to the owners, the property owners, say, we'll cut them down, we'll haul them for free. That might be something to look at. Only trees, if there's not a lot of them. Now, if it's a lot of them where the cost is not gonna allow us to do it, obviously we can't do it. But if it's, I don't know, 30, 40,
I think
50,
think there are a lot of them.
I have no idea how many there are. But,
Well,
what do you think,
trust me,
Tom?
I-
There's a lot of them?
He's gonna check.
Thousands that are on the power
Yeah,
lines?
right.
He's gonna check.
90% of the damage was caused by residential trees on power lines.
Well, you lost a lot of them already.
Well, that's true. We did get cleaned
All right,
out.
and
You
then
cleaned out the herd already.
he reminded me that was the other thing is the fact that if Eric and the board wants to take a grid and help him out in evaluating the volunteer evaluation of the trees on the power line, so that we can bring it to the database of what's going on. You got the scooter to do it.
The
If you need
scooter.
other scooters, we're gonna have a bike program where you can drop the bike off and you can go wherever you want. So I think that if the board, I know if you want, maybe a golf cart,
Irene, right?
and maybe go and maybe get with Tom and the 5E or any other people that want to help volunteer can go ahead and with his expertise of what to mark and get an idea so that he can come back and analyze how many problems we have with trees, what can be taken out, and what can be replaced. Okay, I think one more.
And I'd like to
I
say
just wanted
something
to
to him.
say, now that you're in that train of thought, maybe you could reach out to the marijuana nurseries so they can do that in the golf
At the
course.
golf
What?
course.
Grow weed in the springs? You mean?
No, I'm not going to get into
On
that.
a serious note, I'd like to say
I'm
something.
not going to get into that.
So,
You
Uh,
are a piece of work, man.
having attended the last Park and Parkways meeting and looking at the minutes here, I have a concern and I want to address it because I want to be assured. Here the minutes say that Board Member Fisher asked what would happen if the city did not spend the $50,000 that were allocated for tree planting for this year and use that towards the $100,000 that was budgeted for tree maintenance. And I'm not sure where that came from. I just want, because we approved a certain budget, know that, and all this discussion about tree trimming or cutting, that we are going to allocate the 50,000 to planting. Is that
Yeah,
Is that happening?
That's not part of yeah.
because here
It's already in.
Eric Ritchie added that this concern that this would have to be up to the council. So I'm confused about that because I thought we had already approved that.
We did.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Mayor, if I might, you know, we've been sitting here for just shy of 2 hours, and I'd like to thank like 3 people specifically for being here tonight, citizens that are here. Eric Ritchie, of course, Donna Hernandez, and Lenny Brooks for their thoughts tonight going forward on this stuff.
We have
Thank
the
you,
other
thank you,
board
thank you very
members,
much. Well, no, the board, you know, Lee and Irene, I know.
Pam
Cam.
and
Yes.
Lynn.
Yes.
They speak at the meeting, though, when they're meeting. They all
No,
speak.
but some very interesting points were brought up, and I thank you all for that, by the way.
All right, well, we'll try to get analyzed. Maybe we'll have another meeting to go over what we come up with.
Well, I think we should. I think you know, you have this, and
So
you go
we maybe
forward.
Put the December 27th meeting back into play.
Why not? No, why not?
I won't be
The
here.
You're gonna be. I know you're
I'll
gonna be hunting.
I'll
I
be
know.
I'll be sitting in a tree.
He's gonna be hunting.
I'll be sitting in a tree. Well, thank you. We're gonna take a 5-minute recess, and we'll come back to the hurricane report.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Well, you really